Hello, listeners, and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show Podcast Network. We are the Geek Show's podcast dedicated to the good, the bad, and the befuddling of movies, either starring, by, or about pop stars. No, the podcast covers such a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson, a writer for The Geek Show and Horrified, writer of booklets for Second Run DVD, and a filmmaker in my own right. I am joined this week by...
Hello, I'm Jeff Pizak. I am I guess they could call me a former newspaper writer. But yeah, I'm a full-time movie fan since a young age. I am also known as Scrambled Face over there on Letterboxd.
All right, stop. Collaborate and listen. Cool as Ice is the subject of this, and the Soul movie, you will be astonished to hear, starring Vanilla Ice, and a film whose description I found online is a modern remake of the classic biker movie The Wild One, with heavy emphasis on the fact that rap star Vanilla Ice is playing the Marlon Brando role. I do love that heavy emphasis. This is
I've never seen the Wild One. So I mean, I've seen Rebel Without a Cause, and so I have a little bit of a insight to what they're doing here. But did you see that?
I've never seen The Wild One, although I feel like it's one of those films that has been so parodied that I'm not sure how much you need to see it. You could probably just like stitch together clips from The Simpsons and Red Dwarf and have basically the whole story right there.
Sure.
Yeah, this is interesting for me because I've reviewed a lot of films starring artists who I remember from my teenage years, and I've reviewed a lot of films starring artists who got big before I was born. But this is one of the first times that I've reviewed a film with an artist I remember from my childhood. For some reason, the late 80s, early 90s did not throw up many pop stars who reached that level where someone would make a film starring them.
Yeah, that makes sense. For me, this came out when I was in high school. I was a little older as a teenager, but yeah, you're right. Around this time, there weren't a lot of those vanity or pop star vehicle projects that there were prior, I think.
I think in Britain, part of it was our charts were a very early adopter of acid house and techno. So you've got like the big musical movement of the moment, the type that normally people would make films about, is dominated by people who are deliberately very anonymous. So it doesn't work at all. But I mean, this is a classic example of that problem, isn't it? Cool as Ice, where by the time someone gets famous enough for someone to say, let's make a movie out of them, about them, by the time that movie comes out, they will probably be on the downward slide.
Yeah, that was definitely the case here for sure. He just didn't have that staying power, I think, as a star to really outlast, that film production cycle. I think he was already kind of on the downslide when this hit theaters.
Yeah, because this is, let me see, this is 1991. Yeah. So Ice Ice Baby's already come out, and there isn't really a follow-up that he had to that. I did something that I haven't done before, actually, when I was researching this, and I'm surprised I haven't done it before, which is that I watched an episode of VH1's Behind the Music to study for this.
Mhm.
because like my only real memory of Vanilla Ice from when I was a kid was I remember he was absolutely everywhere for a while, and then he just disappeared. And looking back, the reasons why he disappeared were very obvious, but I was like 8, 9. I didn't really have the mental space for a discussion about cultural appropriation at that time.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean that was always part of his narrative, right? He was the
Mm,
white rapper. He was, the pop face of something that was more of an underground movement.
mm,
His authenticity was always kind of in question. I know definitely for me it was a barrier, but like I said, I was in high school. I was on to more idiosyncratic artists by that point. So
yeah.
when he came on the scene, um, it wasn't for me. But yeah.
Yeah, and I sort of I felt slightly a bit of sympathy for him watching that VH1 episode because he insisted that when he was coming up, he had an almost exclusively black fan base. And I thought, well, that's probably true. Even today, I don't think you can get ahead in rap music without having a pretty sizable black audience. But when he hit big, he was like his image was made over, but it was made over in an odd way. It was like, I think if he just wanted to be a pop star, if he wanted to be like a novelty rapper whose novelty was that I'm the white guy who raps, he could have probably rolled it out. But he wanted to be a massive pop star and insist that he was, from the streets and he had gang experience in his youth, which is totally untenable.
Right. Yeah. I get. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think if you look at somebody like Eminem who came along later,
Mm,
um, he had kind of the same narrative, and that he came up from the streets. He grew up with like black friends, and was a little more tied into it. Um, but there, that you could verify.
yeah.
Vanilla didn't necessarily have that. It was all created in a boardroom somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is a very funny moment on Behind the Music where he talks about the one definitely scary thing that happened to him when he was young, which is that he was stabbed I think he was stabbed by someone who was like robbing a convenience store or something. But and it sounds horrible, all sympathy to him for that. But the way he
Mhm.
describes it, he's very enthusiastic. He's going, and this guy, he came over and he's going, yeah. It's like, he's very happy to have that little shred
Right.
of hood experience to cling on to, I think.
Right. Yeah, no, and I'm sure he's told that story so many times. He's got the perfect dramatic yeah, exposition for it. So
So this is, I'd say, a movie that began its process after Ice Ice Baby, after he had, in retrospect, hit the biggest point of his career. And it's weird, isn't it? Because this is one of the first hip hop movies. I mean, there had been the odd one throughout the 80s, stuff like Breaking, Tougher Than Leather, which is a wholly different kind of misjudgment, I think. But
yeah.
there hadn't been this, I guess, studio driven effort to say, all right, we're going to take one of the templates for pop star movies and we're going to apply it to hip hop. I mean, Breaking was done by Canon Films and they were very outside of that production line system, which I guess is a polite way of saying they didn't have a clue what they were doing a lot of the time.
Yeah, I'm thinking the other one that comes to mind for me is Disorderlies with the Fat Boys.
All
Um,
right.
yeah, that was a comedy, and it was set up as sort of a culture clash. But the three rappers come in and teach the old white guy Ralph Bellamy to be funky and loosen up, and it's that sort of story.
Mm.
But yeah, you're right, personality driven. You had Tougher Than Leather. um, Crush Groove was sort of
Oh,
biopic
yeah.
sort of film,
Yeah.
but I really can't think of anything where a rapper was being put into that template where, you know, like the juvenile delinquent or whatever they were trying with this.
Yeah, and it is worth
Yeah.
questioning what they were trying with this at some points, I think. But yeah, it's interesting because doing this podcast, you do start to recognize a lot of those templates, and it was obvious by the early 90s that you couldn't do one of the classic ones with hip hop, which is the sort of Hard Days Night wacky misadventures stuff that isn't going to work in a genre that was increasingly kind of obsessed with authenticity and honesty. It's strange that they, until I think about 8 Mile, Eminem again, until 8 Mile, no one had really tried at doing the other common template, which is Star is Born. No one had ever done the sort of rise to power thing, which is weird because that is absolutely made for telling stories about hip hop, I think.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, I haven't really kept up with recent biopics, but I feel like that once hip hop became entrenched enough that, you know, the older stars were getting those biopics, it's definitely that's the story that gets told, the rise and maybe a fall, but yeah, that Star is Born narrative is definitely, what else are you going to do with it if you're trying to tell the story, I guess, you know.
I mean, it's the story that a lot of hip hop artists are telling in their lyrics.
Right.
So instead, we get something else, which, as we've said, is this very 1950s kind of juvenile delinquent movie. But tonally, I mean, if it was just Rebel Without a Cause with Vanilla Ice in the James Dean role, that would be weird. That would be weird enough. But tonally, it is like, do you remember when they did that experiment where they gave octopuses ecstasy?
I think I heard about it. Yeah.
When I imagine an octopus on ecstasy, I imagine it must have felt something like the writer's room for Cool as Ice, where you've just got tentacles flying out in all directions and there's no coordination because no two scenes feel like they're from the same movie.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. There's not necessarily in the continuity, but just the impact of it. It has a very sitcom kind of feel where there's a setup, people walk away from the situation and they've just forgotten everything that just happened, you know.
Yeah, it's the only film I've seen that I can think of that has a sitcom reset button that gets pressed like in between scenes.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's such a weird tone about it. It doesn't, you know, for trying to take that older 1950s kind of story and kind of bolting it onto this persona, there's a lot of dissonance that we get, and I'm sure we'll get into it as we talk about specifics. But yeah, I definitely you feel it's definitely one of those films where you see it was created for the youth market by people who don't remember what it's like to be part of the youth market. You know, they've got the just the way that it flows.
We're part of a youth market that now no longer exists, and so you have these like weird bits of old-fashioned genres bolted on. But it begins on the title track, which, my God, is 6 minutes long. And, you know, you think he's not Radiohead. There's no reason for Vanilla Ice to have a 6-minute track. Right.
Yeah, I can't say I've sat down and listened to it on its own, but yeah, in the movie, yeah, it's he's got a couple of short verses, but yeah, it just goes. I think better to showcase its the guest star on the track, Naomi Campbell, who I did not realize the first time I watched this had made an album after this, and had a kind of a career, or at least attempted a career as a singer. But because when I first watched this movie, I first watched it for the first time a month ago, and it just kind of went into one eye and out the other. I said, "Oh, Naomi Campbell, they must have got her to to be in the scene, but no, that was actually her singing. So maybe that was part of it, to give her a little more
Maybe.
time.
I feel like I have no way to verify this, but I feel like the opening was added at a very late stage where someone clearly looked at how the film starts and thought, oh God, that doesn't work at all. Let's bolt the Stars' new music video onto the start. So at least the kids who are paying to see this get what they've come for, like without waiting around.
That definitely makes sense now that you say that, because I'm thinking about how it starts otherwise, and it doesn't necessarily need to be there. Yeah, and he really doesn't get another musical performance for a while in the movie. So yeah, probably just get him in up front.
Because he's not playing a pop star in this. It's not like, but when it started, my assumption was, this is Vanilla Ice's character's new music video, and we're going to watch him walk off set and, or move past his adoring public. And no, there's none of that. It is just a music video.
Yeah, they're I don't even know what this club or concert space is. It's just sort of, it's an old warehouse. Is it an underground show? If so, why do they have this elaborate lighting set up?
Why is a supermodel there? That's kind of a mystery as well.
Right. The only thing I think it sets up at the end when he's off stage, he runs into I forget the girl's name, but she's the groupie who gives him her number, and later on, it becomes a little sticking point between him and his love interest. But that girl is Bobby Brown, who was the Cherry Pie video girl, I believe.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So I mean, but again, it's are you just sticking in a cameo for 1991, or was that supposed to be part of the narrative? I don't know.
It's very strange. I think as a fan of early 90s music video aesthetics, I had to restrain myself from cheering when I saw a fan that had a big spotlight behind it. Man, people thought that looked very cool in the late 80s, early 90s.
Absolutely. Yeah. You see that, exactly when it's from.
It's probably as good a time as any to raise the fact that the cinematographer on this film is Janusz Kaminski, Steven Spielberg's regular cinematographer.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's another thing that opening onslaught of credits and music and lights, that went in one eye and out the other. I said, wow, Kaminski, how interesting. Because, you go from this to Schindler's List in a couple of years, okay, good, good on you, man. But yeah, that is really surprising. And there's some very odd, interesting camera setups that happen once in a while in here. But I don't necessarily get the idea that he had a whole lot of input to, to things. Maybe you notice something different.
Well, I will say that I think it is an extraordinarily good-looking film, and when it engaged me, it certainly was not because of the script, and it certainly was not because of Vanilla Ice's thespian abilities. It was because it is this extraordinarily cared-for-looking film, and I don't want to definitively say that David Kellogg, the director, has nothing to do with that, but his only other film credit is the Inspector Gadget movie. So I think if we're going to lay it at one person's door, Kaminski is the most likely candidate, right?
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah. So when it gets started proper, he has this extraordinary meet cute with his love interest, doesn't he?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it cute, more of a meat menace. He has a look of, and another thing I didn't notice the first time I saw it, but when he first lays eyes on her, he has this look of malice on his face, like an animal stalking its prey, like he's, like a jaguar who just saw a raw steak or something. And yeah, just like the way he locks his eyes on her, and throughout the rest of the movie is just completely one track obsessed with this girl. It's a little it's kind of disturbing when you've seen where it goes.
I think it was the moment at which I realized that this movie was going to be absolutely insane, because, as you say, he looks at her with this bizarre expression that I assume is Vanilla Ice trying to go for sexy bad boy. Yeah, but it's like it's somewhat miscalculated, I will say.
His I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but his persona has he's got this, I'm playing it cool, I can't be too emotive, but it also seems like nothing he's saying has much, he doesn't have a lot of thrust behind it. He doesn't really seem to care one way or another, even when he's defending himself or things later. He just kind of keeps it at that even level tone.
Absolutely, yeah, and he does it when he's doing the most extraordinary things too, which is another thing that gives you that slightly psychopathic vibe that I assume nobody picked him up on, because he jumps the fence on his motorcycle. He's riding along with his crew on a motorcycle, and he sees this girl, Kathy, played by Kristin Minter, riding a horse, and they share a moment, I guess we'll call it. And then he jumps the fence on his motorcycle, and the horse bolts, understandably, and throws her off. And you think, that's something new. I've never seen a romantic comedy kick off with the male lead nearly getting the heroine killed.
Right. Yeah. He knocks her off, and then he starts insulting her. Yeah. Like the whole exchange, if you're just looking at it objectively, like there's no connection. He's like, he harasses her, like maybe he's like trying to prove his motorcycle is faster than a horse. He somehow manages to get his motorcycle in the air over a fence from the road with no ramp. And then after all that, and she stalks off and they go their separate way, he just looks after her and he goes, yup, she likes me. I don't know, where did he get that from? I didn't see her showing any sort of affection to him, but then again, in his mind, he's locked in on his prey, and he's going to make her his however he can. So
I feel like if this was made in the 21st century, I would object to it a lot more, because I would think, this is written by someone who's got an attitude that's formed from like pickup artists or incel shit. But in this context, I really don't think they're playing for that. I think they genuinely, it is the work of a writer and a creative team who are trying to square that circle we mentioned earlier of, all right, he needs to be a rebellious bad boy, and also this needs to be a PG certificate film for young girls. And it's like, well, there are ways to do that, but none of them will be found in the film that we are watching.
I mean, he is consistent in that sense. The way he approaches this relationship is, if that's what you want to call
it. So I'm not sure I can quite describe what happens next, but they end up with this old couple who feel like something from a Pee-wee's Playhouse version of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm guessing it's supposed to be suburban California. One of Vanilla's crew, I hesitate to call them friends because they don't really seem like they know each other or really enjoy each other's company. They just are there. But one of his entourage his motorcycle breaks down, and they pull up to a house that has like Pee-wee's Playhouse is a great example of it. It's the crazy production design. I took them to be, kind of old California, ex-hippie, artist, eccentric, bohemian types. But like what happens next makes virtually no sense. It's a house full of like outsized props with, is it like a map of the world they've got painted on the roof or something?
Yeah, they have a bunch of globes set up, like little posts along. Yeah, they've got all sorts of. They've got words written on the wall inside. I don't know if I caught what was written on there.
It is so weird. I
Mm.
wondered whether they were inspired by like those Southern outsider artists, if they were meant to be kind of a Howard Finster type couple. I mean, maybe they wanted to set it in Kentucky or somewhere, but as soon as they said to
Mm.
Vanilla Ice, all right, let's hear your Southern accent. Jesus, set it in California.
Right. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, but yeah, they don't seem like they're completely out of step with the rest of the movie in the world they're in. Even in their neighborhood, it's a
Yeah.
very basic suburban, middle America kind of setting, but they're just kind of plopped there and get no reaction from their neighbors that we see.
And I think tonally, how what I wrote in my notes is that when Vanilla Ice isn't on screen, it feels like a standard children's comedy of the era, where, as you say, you've got a gang who have no connection to each other. Their only role is to like be divided up by stereotype. There's the cool one, there's the wacky one, there's the token female one. You know, it's
Mm.
on the level of things that are written for an audience who do not care about character development yet. So everything feels very broad and colourful and wacky. But when Vanilla Ice is in it, I can only compare it to a Harmony Korine film where like you've got this absolutely bizarre character who is dressed weirdly and whose actions make no sense, but everyone just looks up to him and agrees that he's really cool and this is normal actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, Harmony Korine's a good comparison. I definitely, yeah, I was seeing all that stuff as, you have the template and that's what the character is and
Mm.
that's what he does. And it doesn't matter how he performs in that role. He's just the cool guy that everybody wants to hang out with. And, the square local kids are just going to immediately have a problem with, even though they haven't talked to him. He's just, he's just filling that role.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it would have been less weird with like a different rapper in the title role, but I don't know. I really don't know. It did give me that kind of. I haven't seen the Beach Bum yet, but what I have seen of the
Mm.
Beach Bum, where everyone just like venerates Matthew McConaughey's character despite him not actually doing anything, it is a bit like that, except it's not consciously absurdist.
Right. Yeah. It's just reaches it on his own terms. Yeah.
Because it's hard to buy him as cool, and I'm not just saying that because he's Vanilla Ice and we remember him as like at best we remember him as a guilty pleasure, but it's like he delivers dialogue like your dad's trying to make fun of rappers. You know, when your dad's all like, "Oh, why are you listening to this?" It's just, "Hey, what's up, yo, shizzle." It's like that's
Yeah.
exactly how Vanilla Ice talks.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you have to wonder, is that his improvisation? Was that written into the script? Or is he saying, nah, dog, we talk like this, yo? And, because it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. He, yeah, he's got all sorts of weird phrases he drops throughout. He's got all these catchphrases. I mentioned yup, which
Yeah.
it's one of the many things he has stenciled onto his jacket at one point. Um, he calls Kathy, or as he immediately labels her Cat when he finds out her name by kind of social engineering, listening to her boyfriend talk to her and finds
Oh
out who she
boy.
is. He changes her name. He calls her the chick who drives the horse, because that's what you do with a horse. Um, yeah, he's got all sorts of weird little phrases he comes up with.
I mean, it is hard, as you say, to tell who's responsible for those things. I will say it is clearly a film made by someone with no feel for the music, because
Mhm.
there are several moments, emotional moments, where it cuts to a scratching solo. And I love old school hip hop. I love the sound of scratching. It really gives me a sort of warm, nostalgic feeling. But it's not romantic. and it's clearly like being done by someone who thinks, what part of this music is emotional? I don't know. Let's just go for the least loud part and hope that's like how people enjoy this stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I think it was the music that he had at the time. So, yeah. I mean, honestly, like if you mentioning that, there's a moment where they're playing like this slow jam rap that by Vanilla Ice,
Oh
and
yeah.
there's a good 10 seconds where they're playing this slow, mellow lover man kind of rap music where he's trying to get onto a horse and unable to get on the horse. And I feel like if you just clip that 10 seconds out and put it on a loop, you'd have a really great beam. For all I know, there is one. But yeah, pure cinema.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, so we've touched on this a bit, but as soon as he meets Kathy again, like there is no part of him that thinks, I almost got that girl killed, I must like make amends to her somehow. He immediately goes into being an absolute turbo dick, even worse than he was before.
Yeah, he starts his alpha. He sees her, then he noticed that she happens to be across the street from the eccentric couple who's fixing the bike. He tells his friends he's going to quote schling a schlong. This is, he's upfront about it at least, but yeah, yes. He goes over there and he just happens to come upon them while they're kind of arguing. And so it's almost like, he waited for his moment and took it. But yeah, that's when he drops the infamous line.
Drop that zero and get with the hero.
Yeah. And I feel like watching it again, I noticed that that's really the moment that turns her, because she's pretty standoffish until he says that, and then she laughs and catches herself. And from that point on, her attitude is, maybe a little standoffish, but definitely interested. So, yeah, and it's weird that is the moment that like flips her.
It is so weird. And at some point here, he steals her address book, which is the point at which I just thought, this is a bit like Twilight, isn't it? You've got like this walking series of red flags, and we're just going to accept this as romantic.
Yeah, Twilight's a great example. That's a great comparison. Yeah, I had that. Yeah, you had that creepy feeling, and you're like, well, maybe we'll get to when he gives it back to her, because like,
oh boy, yeah,
if we want to talk about it now, he ends up sneaking into her house.
Yeah.
in the morning and dripping a melting ice cube into her mouth from, I'm hoping he washed his hands, but he's dripping this water into there, then gets into bed with her, and then was, oh yeah, by the way, I brought your notebook.
I think he gets into bed with her and says, we can't wake your parents up. And it's like, I distinctly remember thinking, you could take this scripted scene out and put it into a drama about a predatory paedophile, and the script would need very little adjustment.
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah, and there's that ice cube thing is so weird, because there is after he puts it in her mouth, there is this very fetishy shot of her just licking her lips, and it's like this is a film that is ultimately intended for little girls, and I don't say that to belittle that. I think little girls deserve better cinema, but that was the image he was going for. It's like, I just want to get into actually his process at the time, because his first single was a cover version. Well, not a cover version. It had the chorus of "Play That Funky Music" by Average White Band. Was that? I forget.
Or Wild Cherry?
Or maybe it was Wild Cherry. Yeah, maybe that's why Bobby Brown's in it. Actually, I didn't think of that. Let me see. Yeah, Wild Cherry. It was Wild Cherry. So he did that, and then some DJ did the classic like DJ thing of saying, "Oh, wonder what's on the B side to this." Flipped it over, it was Ice Ice Baby, and that catapulted him to a different league. His first album was released with a different title and different cover art that kind of played up his image, his sort of, I hasten to use the word sex appeal, but that's what they were going for. And the third single he released was a single called I Love You, which is like, I don't know whether that was the slow jam in here, but it's that sort of thing. So over the course of just his first three singles, you can see that there is a massive and very quick and very successful effort to reroute this guy's career from the white rapper who still has street credibility to a pin-up for teenage girls.
Sure, yeah, and you know, he's kind of both. Yeah, but I mean, again, it's a very manufactured image, and one which I mean, I think that I don't know that he was necessarily comfortable with for too long. I mean, obviously his star kind of faded, and by the time he put out his next album, he had a completely different style from what I recall. Again, I never got very deep into Vanilla, so.
Yeah, I should point out I have not done the Pop Screen deep dive into the back catalogue of Vanilla Ice, but I know that, you know, in some ways it is about doubling down. I guess he always tried to maintain the contradiction that by the turn of the millennium, he was putting out music that was aiming towards sort of the Limp Bizkit, Korn kind of market, but he was also going on The Surreal Life and other reality shows. So that issue that he had of wanting to be like gritty and tough and straight and wanting to be a funny mainstream star who wasn't that threatening, that's still kind of what he does. That hasn't changed in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised to learn, and this is how much I pay attention to current pop culture, is that he's parlayed his fame in, you know, from the reality shows into now he's a home improvement guru. He has, I think, 8 seasons, maybe more, of going into people's houses and doing, you know, makeovers. Which you know, I don't know if he's still going for bad boy there, but it is definitely you see the title and you think, oh, Vanilla Ice, well, how surprising. What does he know about home improvement, you know? And so maybe that contradiction is what he's going for.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, some of these shows I don't think have escaped America, I guess. But he still pops up occasionally on the British TV and radio scene. I remember in the early noughties, I think it was a show called The Farm. It didn't last very long. The concept of it literally was that they just got a load of celebrities to help run a farm. And Vanilla Ice was on, and this was like the middle of the George W. Bush era, and he was playing the kind of ugly American role. And I'm sure that was, like, I'm not saying he's a sensitive and enlightened guy, but I'm sure that was like a heel role. I'm sure that was something that he was consciously doing because it created good television.
Sure. No, yeah, and I recall that now that you're mentioning that, but yeah, I've never been a big reality TV consumer. So, like I said, I was surprised to learn he's had this other show for 8 seasons.
For 8 seasons, yeah,
something like that. Yeah, but the seasons also turn over pretty quickly in that realm. So
yeah, true. Yeah,
but yeah, it's interesting to see how he's tried to, you know, walk those lines of still being, you know, a rabble rouser and, you know, kind of a bad boy, but you know, he'll come in and redo your kitchen and give you a taste of sconce, you know. So
yeah. There's a few things that I want to sort of pick out here because the plot, I mean, it goes in the directions you'd expect. I'd hate to leave any of our listeners with the impression that the Vanilla Ice movie has a Coen Brothers-like ability to zigzag narratively, because it does not. But there's a number of things I want to pull out. There's an early one where we're introduced to Kathy's parents, and I mean that's interesting. Firstly, is it her mum? Her mum is played by Candy Clark,
Right.
who, I mean, pop screen royalty because she was in The Man Who Fell to Earth. You know, lifetime pass for me, I think. But they're gathered to watch what, as far as I can tell, is a news report about how their daughter is nice.
How she's nice and she has a horse.
No, I'm not saying that, you know, California becomes a bit dull once you get out of the big cities, but yeah, that is treated as a major breaking news story.
Well, I think the interesting thing about that is that, so that, I mean, I think about in terms of how local news in the U.S. works, and there's always those human interest stories. You know, we've shown you all the murder and the sports, but here's a nice story about someone in your neighborhood, which makes sense. But it's definitely a local channel. It would be broadcast in the area, but the purpose of that scene of that broadcast is so that the bad guys, the evil ex-cops who we haven't even touched on. One of those guys is sitting in a bar somewhere and sees this being broadcast and tells the guy, hey, you know, I have to turn it up. And it's really, you know, I was thinking, you know, so this guy got into witness protection, Kathy's father, and had somehow been moved to the exact same area where the bad guys are, because there's no way that news broadcast would have reached beyond like their region. So wherever they got moved from was not very far from where all the crimes went down. So yeah,
it also
that's not to think too hard.
It also does raise the question. I mean, this family, we learn, is supposed to be in witness protection. And Kathy doesn't know this, but her family, her father and her mother certainly do. So it does raise the question. I mean, if a local news crew come round and say, we would like to do a piece on your daughter, we hear she has a horse, why did they agree to that?
Right. And why, even if they did, why did the dad agree to be on camera? Because they call him from off screen and they pan the camera over to him, and then he's kind of covering his face doing one of these little jobs, and like that's gonna make a difference. Like you could just say no, man, you know. Now,
like I do not think that if they turn this local news channel down, there will be loads of people camped outside their door saying, tell us about the horse, tell us about the horse.
Right.
You know,
right. Yeah, there's no stakes to it. So why he agrees to it, I have no idea. Are you familiar with the guy who plays the dad? It's Michael Gross.
That rings a vague bell. What else has he done?
He was in Tremors.
Is
probably like the movie that comes to mind, but he was also the dad on the sitcom Family Ties.
Right.
Michael J. Fox's big breakout role. So yeah, he already kind of had that nice, unassuming dad personality, which is why I think they probably cast him as one of the few recognizable faces other than Vanilla Ice in this, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was interesting that they have him in this role, and then they kind of flip it by him being a bit of a bad boy himself, if you want to call it that, for going against the grain with his colleagues and ratting them out.
That's quite good. Yeah, I didn't have that association with him, but that's actually one of the few smart bits of casting in the film, really, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. The other thing that really stands out to me, and is such a fascinating scene in terms of the whole Vanilla Ice kind of the rocks that he was about to hit with his career, shall we say, is as his relationship with Kathy develops, and as he tries to get Kathy away from this guy, I think he was like a soap opera actor who plays Nick, her boyfriend, who's got a very kind of an Agent Cooper look to him. You know, I liked Nick as soon as I saw him, and the more he hated Vanilla Ice, the more I thought there's something to be said for this guy.
Sure.
But there is a scene where they go to a bar and a band of, I think, entirely white guys, certainly white lead singer, are playing a cover version of Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again by Sly and the Family Stone, which feels very calculated, because as soon as you see it, you know, again, this is one of the classic scenes of pop movies. They go to a bar, the band is shit, your hero gets on the stage and, you know, blows them out the water, and sure enough, it happens. But it feels like a very calculated move to have a scene where the implicit punchline is, haha, look at these dorky white guys playing black music in a Vanilla Ice movie.
Right. No, absolutely. I maybe it's just that they're not doing it as well as he does. But yeah, no, there's definitely that scene, because, you know, he gets up there and immediately they have the turntable set up already for him. It's very handy. And then but then when he takes over the club, there's about a minute of intro. Everybody's just standing there watching him very, you know, respectfully. And then his flow, I mean, again, maybe it's just personal preference, but especially in that scene, he's so robotic. There's no passion in what he's doing. He's got that, like I mentioned earlier, there's that kind of like flat, you know, too cool for school kind of delivery. But it's hard to believe everybody would A, wait for him to start rapping, and B, once he started, just stand there and say, "Ooh, well, this is really interesting." You know, it just I would be bored. I'd be like, "Yeah, whatever, guy." You know. So, but you know, that's where Kathy's from.
The British music critic Alexis Petridis, I think he was reviewing Clean Bandit when he said this, said there is a stock scene in British children's drama where, like, if a teacher or a parent or some similar authority figure is introduced hating modern music and only liking classical stuff, the last scene of the drama will always be someone playing like a techno remix of Beethoven's Fifth or something, and they'll be shot from going, this is quite good. And that scene feels like an effort to apply that template to, like, the entire history of black music in America, where suddenly everyone's like, this kid actually gets it.
Yeah. I've seen that scene in so many movies other than this, but yeah, it's not a great example of it.
But at the time, I mean, at the time, this is the problem that Vanilla Ice was trying to navigate, that he was being pushed into this realm where you cannot have street credibility. There is no such thing as a pop star with street credibility. There are some who were a bit spikier than others, but when the competition includes like NWA and the Ghetto Boys, you're not going to win that fight. And around the same time, Third Base, who had white members themselves, released that song Pop Goes the Weasel, which is a really sort of furious diss on Vanilla Ice. And in a strange way, they're doing successfully what this scene is trying to do, which is say, look, we know we're white guys doing black music, but we're not like those white guys doing black music.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'm glad you brought up Third Base, because that came to mind for me too. The video, I think they had them like beating up a fake Vanilla Ice.
It was someone,
for that song.
I forget who it was who played. It was someone notable who was the Vanilla Ice lookalike in that. I'm going to have to look this up because.
Yeah, I don't remember, but I do remember that video. And yeah, it's just, you know, kind of taking the air out of it and taking the air out of yourself, you know, getting ahead of the argument. I feel like artists today are much more attuned to that, but they're also much more attuned to managing their own personal persona out there. It's just like the sign of the times. But Yeah. Did you find out who that was?
Oh boy, did I. It's Henry Rollins.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
I mean,
I'm gonna have to watch that.
For all it's a diss track, that is quite flattering, isn't it, to cast Henry Rollins as Vanilla Ice in your music video?
Absolutely. And well before he was, in, Jack Frost and things, so yeah,
Yes.
that's interesting.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. So you've got this tone that is tense throughout, and I think the last third of it is just where it kind of collapses for me, because you can't reconcile it in any way. Like, obviously, it turns out that Vanilla Ice's character Johnny is the key to defeating these bad guys who are hunting Kathy's family, but when he plays that fight, he is playing it to seem really tough. You can tell him he's thinking, I hope I get like an action movie, maybe a martial arts thing off the back of this. But David Kellogg overdubs it with, I think at one point someone gets punched and there's like little Tweety Bird sound effects like an old Tom and Jerry cartoon. And,
Yep.
It's just irreconcilable stuff. It rips itself apart.
Yeah, I mean, the bad guys themselves really don't seem like much of a threat. It's two guys, the one who watched the video, and then he's got a sidekick who's constantly making these kind of quirky bad guy banter.
Yes.
Yeah, like they never, there's this, they've kidnapped the brother and they're holed up in their stronghold, and they're looking out the window, and they see them drive up on their motorcycles, and they call them aliens, as if they've never seen people on motorcycles before. Like, they're so outlandish. They're not dressed that crazy or anything. Yeah, it's really, but again, yeah, like that whole threat, that whole like, we have to have this crime subplot in here.
Yeah.
It's never convincing. It's, again, I think another way to give him that dangerous edge, or there's some sort of something illicit going on here to tie it into crime. And hip hop is a gritty milieu, so you have to do that. But
yeah,
you never feel the danger.
God, no. I feel like if this was made about sort of 3 or 4 years after it was, they would have just cut their losses and made those guys like Men in Black or something like that, something completely fantastical. Because, as you say, they certainly never convince us actual criminals.
Yeah, even when they round them up, they drive in and they have them tied to the hood of the car. They look very complacent. They're not struggling. They're not protesting. They're just, yes, they caught us. Oh well,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really strange. And I think for one thing I noticed this time is that the whole reason they kidnapped the kid is because Vanilla Ice dropped him off at the house. He was supposed to be at Little League. His sister was supposed to pick him up. Vanilla decided to drive around with him and leave him at the house. And the whole reason the kid got kidnapped is because he dropped the kid there. So he'd better go rescue him. It's his fault.
Yeah. I guess they'll have thought, we can introduce a bit of complexity here. We can have our hero make a mistake after he's already won our hearts by nearly killing the woman he's into and stealing her address book and creeping into her bed. No, wait, this isn't going to work, isn't it?
Yeah, you have to give him the hero moment, but
yeah,
he's fixing the problem he created. So I mean, good for you, Vanilla.
But in a strange way, even though like the last third of the movie is an absolute dud dramatically, it also is some of the most beautiful stuff. The love montage, it is more beautiful than anything that can be described as a Vanilla Ice love montage deserves to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, are you talking about the construction site one, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's got such a different kind of a playful tone that's actually convincing. They're kind of swinging each other around. I mean, you don't buy the characters being in love, but you definitely, you can sense what they're going for.
It suddenly, there are all these things of them embracing in fields of waving grasses, and you think,
Right.
I wonder, is it Kellogg or Kaminski? Which one of them is the Terrence Malick fan here?
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, yeah, his dialogue kind of ruins it, but yeah, no, the look of it. Yeah, you're right. He's got that kind of golden. You feel the sun.
Mm. I mean, it's things like this that, despite the fact that it is in lots of ways a very bad movie, it is also weirdly hard to dislike, I think.
Yeah, it moves pretty quickly, even if nothing, the details don't really accumulate into something you're invested in. It's pretty harmless, it's pretty
Yeah.
painless.
I think it is probably easier to enjoy it looking back, where maybe if I'd seen it at the time, I would have had the same kind of worry that Third Base had. I would have sat there and thought, have they cracked how to exploit and whitewash hip hop? Is this what the future's going to be like? But as we know, it wasn't. And, I'm not an Eminem fan, but I think he has like infinitely more artistic credibility. He's like earned his place. So this isn't really, and when I think of white rappers now, like who are around now, the main one I think of is LP, who
Absolutely.
you would have to say that if he is going for like if he was trying to go for that Vanilla Ice market, he would not make the music that he does. So it's pretty safe to enjoy that stuff, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, LP came up as like an independent artist. Like, yeah, like it's one of the few currently popular rap artists I'm like really passionate about, actually, because I came up listening to his stuff. But he the whole race and trying to like play that into your persona was never part of his scheme.
Yeah.
He is who he is. You can see from his picture what he looks like, and but again, he came around at a later time, and he came around at a time where you didn't have that scrutiny of the mainstream. He was an underground artist,
Yeah.
so he was that first and foremost in his. I think in that type of underground rap, your ethnicity, your gender, any of that stuff doesn't necessarily become part of your,
I think it only counts when someone is like very big. And when someone is very big, as with, say, Macklemore last decade, there is this question of, is this guy big because he's great, or is this guy big because record companies would rather push a white artist than a black one? And that ended up kind of doing for Macklemore as well, because people, I think, was it the Grammys who gave his album like best rap record over to Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar, and everyone was like, you sure about that? Are you absolutely sure about that?
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's the Grammys for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, yeah, he's a very different case, because he didn't enter the world as a mainstream artist. He blew up into one and became, I mean, it was treated as a one-hit wonder basically, but yeah, I think, yeah, you're right. In that kind of space where you've reached that level of fame, the question's going to come up.
Yeah. And the fact that it comes up is proof that hip hop is still in touch with its roots, even though it is probably like the dominant form of music. It replaced rock as the cutting edge a long time ago. It's arguably now replaced pop music as like the standard type of music that the chart revolves around, but it still has some kind of integrity and authenticity. And maybe if it hadn't had to deal with Vanilla Ice very early on in its evolution, maybe it would have never worked out a coping strategy for this kind of thing. You never know.
True. Yeah, we can look at him as a growing pain.
Yes. So, any closing thoughts about Cool as Ice or Vanilla Ice in general before we wrap up?
I would just wrap up with like a one thought toward the end of the film that I had.
Yeah.
Tracing that narrative of him being this stalker who kind of insidiously weaves his way into his quarry's life. At the end, spoilers for for Cool as Ice, I guess. But he whisks her away on concert tour with him. Because he is playing an actual venue at the end. He's on stage, so we can see, okay, I guess he is a musician. And that's what he does. But he's got her in the audience. She's not done with high school yet. The whole conflict has been that she's going to college, but she's there. And he goes into this whole thing about how he's not sure she's for him. And he's a cool guy, and, he's in love now, but maybe not. And then I wrote down the line because it really stuck out to me. He said, I'm glad she came to her senses and put down all of her defenses. Straight up just telling you in the song that he was working this psychological angle on her. So yeah, I don't know. He's a villain. If you ask me, he's a villain. So that's my last thought.
Season 4 review on Netflix starring Vanilla Ice. That's what I want now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But yes, if you enjoyed today's podcast, we have bonus episodes for our Patreon backers. You can find those at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, where you also get early access to our other movie podcast, Directors Uncut, and my Doctor Who reviews. But until next week, that's been your lot from Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
And I've been Jeff.
And we'll see you next week.